He was never the type to believe in urban legends, especially the kind whispered in the dark corners of the high school halls or around flickering campfires. But when Ethan stumbled upon an old yellowed notebook in his late uncle's attic, curiosity overpowered skepticism. The pages were filled with strange symbols, cryptic notes, and a description of a game, a ritual game, that promised to reveal hidden truths, but warned of dire consequences. The instructions were clear, but unnerving. Find a secluded place at midnight. Prepare 3 objects: an old coin, a black candle, and a personal item that once belonged to someone you fear, and recite the incantation from the book. The game, the notebook said, would open a doorway. Step through, and you might learn secrets no living person was meant to know. Fail, and you might never return. Ethan, always hungry for a thrill and desperate to prove himself, decided to play. The small town he lived in was the perfect stage. Forgotten forests, abandoned houses, and shadows that felt alive. The night he chose was cloudy, the moon hiding behind thick clouds, as if warning him to stay away. He gathered the items: a rusty coin his grandfather had given him, a black candle stolen from the depths of his grandmother's cabinet, and an old locket that once belonged to his estranged father. With trembling hands, he lit the candle and whispered the incantation, his voice barely louder than the rustling leaves. The air thickened. The shadows around him deepened and grew restless. A cold wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the candle instantly. Suddenly, the world around Ethan warped. Trees bent unnaturally. The ritual game had begun. Ethan found himself in a distorted version of his town. Streets twisted and cracked, buildings decayed and whispering secrets. Faces appeared and disappeared in windows. Shadows moved against the light, and a presence lurked just beyond sight. Panic set in, but he knew running wouldn't save him. He needed to play by the rules. Hours stretched like days as Ethan navigated the maze of this nightmare realm, each step testing his mind, his will, and his soul. The game fed on his fears, conjuring memories he wished to forget, voices he could not silence, and visions that clawed at his sanity. At one point, he faced a mirror, reflecting not his own face, but a hollow shell, empty and screaming. Another time, a voice called him by name from the darkness, promising escape. It demanded a price. With every failed trial, Ethan felt himself slipping further away, his grip on reality loosening. He remembered a warning scrawled in the notebook's margins. Speak the truth you hide, the truth you fear. Only then can you break the ritual's chain. Summoning all his courage, Ethan confronted his darkest secret. The guilt he buried over his father's disappearance, the lies he told himself to move on. As the confession left his lips, the nightmare began to unravel. The twisted town dissolved into a void of swirling shadows and light. Ethan felt himself falling, then waking up in the same forest clearing, dawn breaking and birdsong returning. But the game had changed him. He looked down at his hands, pale, trembling, and knew that though he had come back, a part of him was lost forever. Because Ethan's legs trembled as he stumbled back toward the town's edge, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the canopy. The familiar sights of his world, the cracked pavement, the rusted swing set in the park, the faded graffiti on brick walls, felt both comforting and alien. He was home, yet something inside whispered that home was no longer the same place. His phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from his best friend, Jamie. Dude, you okay? You ghosted last night. He stared at the screen, fingers cold and shaking. How could he explain where he'd been? How to put into words the places he'd walked, the shadows that had tried to pull him into the abyss? Ethan's mind flared with images, those flickering faces in broken windows, the voice calling him from the dark, the mirror that showed nothing but emptiness. Days passed, but Ethan's nights grew restless. Sleep evaded him like a trickster. Dreams twisted by the ritual's lingering grasp. Each time he closed his eyes, the ritual realm bled through, twisting his thoughts into nightmares. Shadows danced in corners where no light should reach. Whispers echoed from empty rooms, promising that the game was not over, that the price was still due. At school, he found it impossible to focus. Friends' voices became muffled as his mind replayed the ritual's horrors. Teachers' questions dissolved into static. His world was unraveling thread by thread. One evening, Ethan returned to his uncle's attic, desperate for answers. The notebook lay open on the dusty floor, its pages now stained with something dark, maybe ink, maybe something else. Then he found it. A single sentence scrawled hastily in the margin of the last page. The game demands balance. For every soul it takes, it leaves a shadow behind. Ethan swallowed hard. A shadow behind? Was that what had followed him home? The cold whispers? The feeling of unseen eyes watching. He wasn't safe. The ritual game had reached beyond its realm, crossing into his world, and it wanted more. The next days were a blur of growing dread. Ethan couldn't escape the feeling that something was trailing him just beyond sight, in the corner of his eye, in the dark spaces of his room. At school, he caught glimpses of shifting shadows, flickers of movement when no one else was around. His phone's screen would sometimes glitch, distorting faces or showing static-filled images of places he hadn't seen in years. One night, the whispers came again, louder this time, curling around his mind. Unable to bear it any longer, he returned once more to the attic, flashlight in hand. The notebook lay open, and beneath it, something new. A faded photograph, yellowed and cracked. It showed a group of people standing in a circle in the same clearing where Ethan had played the ritual game. Their faces were obscured, but the posture was clear, each holding one of the ritual items. On the back, a scrawled note. They didn't come back either. Panic surged. This wasn't a game played only once by one desperate soul. This was a trap, a cycle. Others had entered, vanished without a trace. Ethan's breath caught as a sudden noise echoed through the attic. A low, guttural growl rising from the shadows behind him. He spun around, flashlight beam cutting through darkness, but found only emptiness. Still, the weight in the air pressed heavier, as if something unseen was waiting for him to turn away. He realized then the shadow that followed him wasn't just a presence. It was a part of the ritual itself, a darkness tied to the souls it claimed. And now it wanted Ethan's. The days after that night in the attic felt like living inside a nightmare. Ethan's reflection in the mirror began to warp. His eyes seemed darker, deeper, as if a shadow stirred beneath the surface of his skin. He tried to tell Jamie what was happening, but the words stuck in his throat, choked by fear and disbelief. Every night, The shadows grew bolder. They slipped through cracks in the walls, pooling in corners like spilled ink. Ethan's dreams were haunted by the faces from the photograph. The faceless figures trapped in that endless circle, reaching out silently for release. One evening, Ethan found a message scrawled on his bedroom wall, written in a shaky, almost illegible hand. Finish the game or be consumed. His heart hammered. There was no one else in the house. And yet the message was there. The ritual was pulling him deeper, demanding completion. Desperate, Ethan returned to the forest clearing, the place where it had all begun. The moon hung low, a sliver of silver in the black sky. He set up the ritual again. Black candle, coin, and the locket. Feeling the cold grip of dread, he spoke the incantation once more, voice barely a whisper. The air thickened and the world bent as before. But this time, Ethan wasn't alone. Figures emerged from the shadows, silent, faceless, bound by the game's curse. Their hands reached for him, cold and desperate. He realized then the truth the notebook hid. The ritual was a prison, and every player a prisoner, trapped between worlds. Ethan's only chance was to break the cycle by facing the darkness inside himself, the secret fears and regrets he buried. With trembling resolve, he confessed the truth he'd hidden all along, the pain that had shaped him. As the words left his lips, the shadows recoiled. The nightmare realm shattered like glass, and Ethan awoke in the forest clearing, dawn light filtering through the trees. But the game wasn't over. The shadows followed him still. After that terrifying night, Ethan returned home, but the world felt irrevocably altered. Every sound was amplified. The creak of floorboards, the whistle of wind through cracked windows, and every shadow seemed to flicker with something alive, something waiting. He tried to tell Jamie, but the words failed him. How could he explain the ritual game, the faceless prisoners, the shadow that clung to him like a second skin? Even his own reflection seemed to hold a secret, an echo of the darkness he'd barely escaped. Days turned into restless nights, and Ethan's grip on reality began to slip. Schoolwork fell behind. Friends' voices turned into distant echoes. He isolated himself, haunted by the idea that the game's curse was not bound to the clearing. It had followed him home. One eve inside, a new message The game never ends. You must invite another. Panic surged. The ritual demanded a new player, someone else to enter the cycle, to draw the curse away from Ethan's soul. But who? How? That night, the shadow whispered again, cold and relentless, reminding Ethan that his time was running out. The only way to survive was to pass the game to another. But Ethan refused. He knew the truth now. The ritual wasn't just a game. It was a trap designed to feed on fear, to chain souls in endless torment. And this time, he vowed he would break the chain forever. Determined not to become another victim, Ethan spent every waking hour researching the ritual, poring over the notebook, searching for a loophole, a way out. The words and symbols began to blur, but something inside the notes caught his attention. A hidden verse, written in almost invisible ink beneath the final page. It read, "To break the chain, one must face the void alone, and welcome the darkness without fear." The meaning was clear, yet terrifying. Ethan had to confront the source of the curse itself, a void where all the lost souls were trapped, and willingly surrender to it without succumbing. That night, armed only with the notebook and his resolve, Ethan returned to the clearing one last time. The air was thick with silence. The moon, as he chanted the incantation, the world warped, the familiar darkness pulling him into its depths. But this time, Ethan stepped forward, not as a prisoner, but as a challenger. The shadows swirled around him, their whispers turning to screams of rage and despair. Faces appeared, those trapped by the ritual's curse, reaching out, begging for release. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the void's cold embrace. But instead of fear, he welcomed it with open arms, speaking aloud a promise to end the cycle, to free the lost, even if it meant losing himself. A blinding light exploded, and then silence. When Ethan opened his eyes, he was alone in the clearing, the first light of dawn breaking through the trees. The notebook was gone. The shadow. Ethan stood in the clearing, his breath still ragged, the weight of what he had just endured pressing down on him. The dawn painted the sky in pale hues of orange and pink, but the forest seemed different, lighter, as if the darkness that had long hung over it was finally lifting. He reached into his pocket expecting to find the ritual items still there. But they were gone. The black candle, the coin, the locket, all vanished without a trace. For the first time in weeks, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. The nightmare might finally be behind him. But as he turned to leave, a soft voice echoed in the breeze. Barely audible, but unmistakable. The game never truly ends. Ethan froze, heart pounding. The shadows in the trees stirred, but this time they didn't advance. They watched, waiting. He hurried home, every sense alert. Over the next days, he tried to return to normal life. School, friends, sleep. But the feeling of being watched never left. One evening, as he lay in bed, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Are you ready to play again?" The screen flickered and went black. Ethan's blood ran cold. The ritual game was not over. Ethan's fingers trembled as he stared at the blank screen. The message haunted him, a chilling reminder that the darkness was far from gone. He tossed the phone onto his bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Shadows crept into every corner of his room, twisting into shapes that whispered secrets he dared not understand. Days blurred into restless nights. Ethan avoided his friends, withdrew from the world, his mind a battlefield between hope and despair. The notebook was gone, but the game's grip tightened, invisible chains binding his soul. Then, one night, a soft knock echoed through the house. Ethan's breath caught. He wasn't expecting anyone. At the door stood Jamie, pale and wide-eyed. "Ethan, Together, they searched for answers, diving into old legends, forgotten rituals, desperate to find the way to break the cycle forever. But the ritual game was a living thing, hungry, patient, and cunning. And it had set its sights on them both. The more Ethan and Jamie dug into the history of the ritual game, the darker and more twisted the story became. They discovered that the game had roots reaching back centuries, whispered among secret societies and hidden in the margins of dusty tomes. It was not merely a game, it was a curse, passed down through generations, a trap laid by an ancient entity feeding off fear and souls. Every player became a link in an endless chain, lost to the void unless they could break free. And breaking free wasn't just about courage. It required understanding the true nature of the darkness. One night, as the moon hid behind thick clouds, Ethan and Jamie returned to the clearing together. They set up the ritual items: black candle, coin, and locket, this time with purpose and unity. The air grew heavy with anticipation as they chanted the incantation. The world twisted again, but this time the shadows were not faceless. They revealed themselves as former players, lost souls trapped in limbo, reaching out for salvation. Ethan felt a cold hand brush his shoulder. A blinding light erupted, and suddenly they were back in the clearing at dawn. The curse was broken, not by fleeing, but by confronting the darkness with strength and friendship. For now, the game was over. Days passed, and Ethan felt a strange calm settle over him. The shadows that had once clawed at the edges of his vision were gone. Jamie seemed different too, more alive, as if the ritual had changed something deep inside them both. But the world was never truly free of the game's touch. One evening, Ethan received a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single phrase scrawled in familiar handwriting. The ritual only ends when the last player forgets. The words chilled him. Forgetting was a slow death, a surrender to oblivion. But it also hinted at something more. The game was waiting for him to let go. Determined not to fall prey again, Ethan vowed to remember, to keep the truth alive and warn others. Because somewhere in the shadows between worlds, the ritual game still whispered, waiting for the next player brave or foolish enough to play. And Ethan knew he would never be the same again. Weeks turned into months, and Ethan tried to rebuild his life. The nightmare that had consumed him still lingered, like a shadow cast over his every step. He kept the memories alive, refusing to let them fade, even when the burden grew heavy. He and Jamie met regularly, poring over ancient texts and online forums, piecing together the puzzle of the ritual game. They discovered each player faced their own unique torment, shaped by their past and psyche. Some were consumed by guilt, others by regret, but all were trapped in the endless loop of the game, until someone could break free. Ethan realized that the key wasn't just bravery, but acceptance. To conquer the game, one had to embrace their darkest fears, confront the parts of themselves they had long buried, and find peace within the chaos. One evening, under a blood-red moon, Ethan and Jamie returned to the clearing once more. This time, they weren't there to play, but to close the door forever. They prepared the ritual with solemn care, lighting the black candle and placing the coin and locket on the ground. As they chanted the incantation, the shadows rose, swirling into shapes of faces they recognized. Lost friends, family. Ethan stepped forward, heart steady. He spoke aloud his acceptance, his forgiveness, for himself and for the shadows that had haunted him. The darkness pulsed, then began to dissolve, melting into the morning light. When dawn broke, the clearing was silent, empty. The ritual game was finally over, but Ethan knew one thing for certain. Some games never truly end. They only wait. In the days that followed, Ethan felt a strange sense of freedom. But the memories of the ritual game remained vivid. He often found himself staring into the night, wondering if the darkness had truly been vanquished, or merely retreating to wait for another moment. Jamie stood by him, their bond forged through shared terror and triumph, a silent promise to face whatever came. Life tried to return to normal. School, friends, the mundane rhythms of daily existence. But Ethan's mind was forever changed. He began to notice small, unsettling details. Shadows that seemed to flicker unnaturally. Whispers that floated just beyond hearing. And fleeting glimpses of figures at the edge of his vision. Though the ritual game was over, its echoes lingered like a ghost refusing to rest, determined to understand more. Ethan and Jamie delved deeper into ancient texts and folklore, uncovering tales of similar curses woven into the fabric of human history. These stories spoke of games played with fate, where the stakes were souls and the prize was freedom or eternal entrapment. One night, Ethan dreamt of the void again, not as a place of terror, but as a realm of lost hopes and forgotten promise. Awakening with a start, Ethan resolved to document everything. The rituals, the signs, the ways to resist. He started a journal, a guide for anyone who might one day encounter the ritual game. The notebook, once his curse, became a tool for survival. Months passed, and the world around Ethan shifted. He noticed others who seemed touched by similar shadows. Friends who vanished without explanation. Strangers with haunted eyes. The ritual game was no longer a solitary nightmare, but a spreading darkness, feeding on fear and doubt. Ethan and Jamie knew their fight was far from over. They began reaching out, connecting with others, forming a quiet network of survivors and seekers. Together, they shared stories, rituals, and warnings, building a fragile shield against the encroaching night. And when that day came, Ethan vowed he would be ready. The nights grew longer, and Ethan's sleep remained restless, haunted by dreams that felt more like warnings. The ritual game was no longer just a memory. It was a presence, a shadow lurking at the edges of his consciousness. Jamie, too, changed. She became quieter, her eyes distant, as if she was hearing something Ethan could not. They tried to hold on to normalcy, but the weight of the unseen world pressed heavier each day. One evening, Ethan received a package, an old weathered book tied with a black ribbon. Inside was a note written in a shaky hand. The game's rules are older than time. To break free, you must face the final trial. The book described, despite the fear gnawing at him, Ethan felt a grim determination. He couldn't let the game claim more lives. Not Jamie's, not his own, not anyone else's. Together, they prepared for the final trial. They gathered rare ingredients, herbs, candles, relics, and mapped out the ritual under the blood moon, the time when the veil between worlds was thinnest. The night arrived, cold and silent. They stood in the clearing, shadows flickering like specters around them. Ethan began the chant, voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. As the ritual unfolded, the ground trembled, and the air thickened with an oppressive force. Faces from the shadows emerged, lost players, twisted and pleading for release. Ethan and Jamie held firm, calling out to the darkness with voices full of defiance and hope. The shadows screamed. A blinding flash enveloped them, and then silence. When Ethan opened his eyes, the clearing was empty, bathed in the soft glow of dawn. The game was over, or so it seemed. In the days following the final ritual, Ethan felt a calm he hadn't known in months. The oppressive weight lifted, replaced by a fragile hope. Jamie smiled more often, the shadows behind her eyes slowly fading. They returned to their routines, but neither could shake the feeling that something was still watching. Ethan's journal grew thick with notes, warnings, and fragments of rituals. He shared it with a few trusted friends, hoping to build a network of knowledge, a defense against the unseen threat. But the ritual game was cunning. It adapted, changed its form, waiting patiently for the next player. One evening, Ethan found a message scrawled on his bedroom mirror in condensation. You cannot escape what you refuse to see. Fear prickled his skin. The game had left a trace, a reminder that the darkness was never truly gone. Determined to end it for good, Ethan and Jamie began researching not just the rituals, but the entity behind the game. A timeless force feeding on fear and despair. Their research led them to an ancient legend about a forgotten guardian, a spirit trapped between worlds, capable of sealing the curse forever. To summon this guardian, they would need to perform a dangerous ritual during the next eclipse, using artifacts scattered across the country. The journey ahead was daunting, but Ethan knew it was their last chance. P.S. Ethan and Jamie spent the next weeks preparing for their journey. They gathered maps, ancient texts, and carefully packed the artifacts they had managed to find. An obsidian dagger, rumored to have been forged in the underworld. A silver amulet etched with protective runes, and a vial containing the ashes of a phoenix from a forgotten legend. Each item seemed imbued with a strange energy, as if alive with the weight of their mission. Their plan was risky. They needed to visit 3 sacred sites scattered across the country. Places where the veil between worlds was thin, and where the Guardian's presence might still linger. Only by performing a complex ritual at each location during the eclipse could they hope to awaken the Guardian and bind the ritual game forever. The first site was an abandoned chapel deep in the forests of Vermont. The building was crumbling, overgrown with vines, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and forgotten prayers. As they stepped inside, the atmosphere shifted. A cold wind whispered through the broken windows, carrying voices from the past. Ethan began the chant from the ancient texts, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Jamie held the amulet, its runes glowing faintly in the dim light. Suddenly, the floor beneath them trembled, and shadows gathered at the edges of the chapel, writhing like smoke. A figure appeared, an old woman, her eyes glowing with an ethereal light. "You seek the guardian," she said, her voice a haunting melody. "But beware, for the path you walk is fraught with sacrifice." The woman handed them a worn scroll containing the next steps. "The second site lies beneath the desert sands of Arizona, where the sun burns the earth and the stars reveal the hidden truths." They left the chapel with a new resolve, feeling the weight of destiny pressing on them. The journey was far from over. In Arizona, the desert stretched endlessly. A sea of golden dunes shimmering under the relentless sun. At night, the sky erupted with stars, each one a silent witness to their quest. They dug beneath an ancient stone circle, uncovering a hidden chamber filled with strange symbols and relics. But the ritual was interrupted by a sudden tremor. The ground cracked open, revealing a chasm of darkness. From it emerged creatures of nightmare, twisted forms born of fear and despair. Ethan and Jamie fought desperately, using the amulet and dagger to repel the shadows. When dawn broke, the desert was silent once more. Exhausted but unbroken, they prepared for the final sight. The last location was atop a remote mountain in Oregon, shrouded in mist and legend. The climb was treacherous, the air thin and cold. At the summit, they found an ancient stone altar, carved with symbols that pulsed with energy under the eclipse. With a voice that echoed through the cosmos, the Guardian declared the ritual game sealed, its curse broken. The shadows recoiled, their whispers fading into silence. Ethan and Jamie collapsed, the weight of their journey finally lifting. The world felt lighter, freer, as if a dark veil had been lifted. But Ethan knew deep down that some darkness never truly dies. It only waits. Ethan and Jamie stayed on the mountaintop as the last rays of the eclipse faded, the Guardian's presence slowly dissolving into the mist. The air around them seemed to breathe with new life. the oppressive weight of the ritual game lifting like a fog in the morning sun. Dot. But the silence was deceptive. Ethan could feel a subtle pulse beneath the earth, a reminder that while one battle had ended, the war might not be over. Descending the mountain, they found themselves forever changed, marked by the experience, bound by a shared secret few could understand. The world seemed simultaneously more vibrant and more fragile, a delicate balance between light and darkness. Back home, Ethan returned to his journal, now a testament to survival and resistance. He knew the ritual game's stories would never fade from human memory, passed down like a cautionary tale to warn those who might stumble upon it. Though they had sealed the game, Ethan often caught himself glancing over his shoulder, wondering when the next player would hear the call to the ritual game. Ethan and Jamie stood quietly as the Guardian's light slowly faded into the early dawn. The oppressive darkness that had haunted them for months finally seemed to lift, replaced by a fragile peace. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt hope. Hope that the nightmare was truly over. But even as they descended the mountain, the silence around them felt fragile, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Ethan glanced back one last time, feeling a chill run down his spine. The shadows might have been driven away, but he knew better than to believe the darkness was gone forever. Back in their small apartment, they carefully locked away the ancient book, the artifacts, and the memories of the ordeal. Ethan began writing down everything, every detail, every warning, for anyone who might find themselves trapped in the ritual game's. Jamie looked at him, eyes shining with gratitude and something deeper, an unspoken promise to protect one another from whatever might come next. The game had taken so much from them, but it had also shown them the strength they never knew they had. Ethan closed his journal and looked out the window, the city waking up under the morning light. Somewhere out there, a new player might be tempted by the ritual game's dark call. But now they had a chance to fight back. Because while some games never truly end, the will to survive and fight the